Unaware she owned the very company they worked for, Ethan sent his wife, Lila, a cold divorce text in the middle of her board meeting. The same meeting where he unknowingly served under her signature on every contract. He emptied their $200 million joint account within minutes to marry her best friend, laughing at the thought of her being just a secretary. But beneath Lila's silence was a power he couldn't begin to imagine. A secret that could destroy everything he thought he controlled. Why did she never tell him she owned the company? Why did her best friend betray her? And when the truth finally surfaced, what did Lila do that left Ethan begging for mercy? The morning sunlight spilled gently across a quiet suburban kitchen, the kind that looked borrowed from a dream. Golden light brushing over polished countertops, the smell of pancakes floating through the air. Charlotte Monroe hummed softly to herself, flipping one on the skillet while her two children argued playfully over who would get the first stack. Her laughter, light and effortless, filled the room like music. From the outside, this was the picture of a woman who had everything: a loving home, a successful husband, a life perfectly stitched together. Jonathan Monroe entered the kitchen in his tailored charcoal suit, his cufflinks gleaming like mirrors. His smile was sharp, camera-ready, the kind that melted strangers, but never reached his eyes anymore. Charlotte turned, her heart lifting instinctively at the sight of him, still hoping for that familiar warmth. "You're up early," she said gently, sliding a plate toward him. He barely glanced at it. "Big day. Investor briefing at 9. His voice was clipped, distant. She smiled, masking the sting. "You'll do great. You always do." Jonathan nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. "Yeah." The silence stretched. The sound of butter sizzling filled the space where affection used to live. Charlotte looked at him, at the man she'd loved for 12 years, and felt the ache of something slipping away. She didn't know that by sunrise he had already decided to erase her from his life. Last night, during their 12th anniversary dinner, Jonathan had stood in front of friends, investors, and photographers, raising a glass to her. "To Charlotte," he'd said, his tone full of charm and practiced affection. "The woman behind every success I've had." The crowd had applauded, flashes going off, the perfect portrait of a devoted husband. But beneath the table, hidden from the world, Jonathan's fingers had moved quickly, typing a message to his young secretary, Sienna Brooks. "Tomorrow morning, it's done. I'm yours." Now, as Charlotte wiped syrup off her son's cheek and listened to her daughter's laughter, her husband was sending another text. Not to her, but to finalize a transfer that would drain the account they'd built together. He pocketed his phone, leaned over and kissed her cheek. It was mechanical, cold, a gesture of habit, not love. "Don't wait up," he said before walking out. The door closed softly behind him. The house exhaled. Charlotte smiled faintly, unaware that her world had just started collapsing. She packed the kids' lunches, tied her daughter's shoes, and walked them to the car, her heart full of quiet pride. She loved mornings like this. Simple, ordinary, safe. She didn't know that somewhere across town, Jonathan was sitting in his office, his signature pen scratching across documents, her name being replaced, her security being erased. By mid-morning, she poured herself a cup of coffee and opened her phone, a small smile forming as she thought of sending Jonathan a good luck text for his investor meeting. Before she could type, her phone buzzed. A new message from him appeared on the screen. "It's over. Don't call me. The account is mine now." Charlotte blinked. The words blurred. For a moment, she thought it was a cruel joke. Her chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. She opened their joint banking app. Her thumb trembled as she refreshed the balance. $0 Zoar. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering against the tile. Her pulse roared in her ears. She dialed Jonathan immediately, heart pounding, tears clouding her vision. The call connected, then his voice, cold, distant, like a stranger. "Don't embarrass yourself, Charlotte," he said flatly. "You always depended on me. It's over. I've moved on." "Moved on," she whispered, her throat tightening. "What are you talking about, Jonathan? What did you do?" "I'm marrying Sienna. She's everything you're not. Smart, fresh, ambitious." His laugh cut through her like glass. You're just tired, a housewife, and now irrelevant. The line clicked dead. For a long moment, Charlotte stood frozen in her kitchen. The morning light still warm, the pancakes still golden, while the ground beneath her life cracked open. Her daughter's laughter echoed faintly from outside. A cruel reminder that she had to hold herself together. Her phone buzzed again, this time a notification from the bank confirming joint account fully transferred by authorized user J. Monroe. Authorized. Her own name was no longer on the account. Charlotte pressed her palm to her lips to stop the scream clawing its way up her throat. She stumbled to the sink, gripping the counter, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. Her mind raced, humiliation, disbelief, betrayal, all crashing at once. How could he? How could the man she built everything with erase her so easily? The kitchen blurred as tears filled her eyes. She looked at the family photo on the counter. Jonathan's hand around her waist, their smiles perfect for the world. Lies, every inch of it. She turned off the stove, forced her breathing to slow, and wiped her face. Her children couldn't see her break. Not yet, not ever. But beneath the ache, something else began to stir. Something deep, cold, and steady. She didn't know how yet, but she would find out why he'd done this. And when she did, the man who thought he'd destroyed her would learn the truth he'd never imagined. Because Charlotte Monroe wasn't just his wife, she was the silent owner of everything he thought was his. Charlotte gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles blanched. The road ahead blurred through her tears, a smear of gray under a pale morning sky. She didn't remember starting the car, didn't remember how she'd thrown on her coat or locked the door behind her. All she knew was that she needed answers, and Jonathan was going to give them. Her phone kept vibrating in the passenger seat. Friends, neighbors, messages from the PTA chat, all buzzing with the mundane chatter of normal life. The kind of life she no longer had. She turned it face down. Every mile between her and Jonathan's office burned away another layer of disbelief, replacing it with something heavier, sharper. When she pulled into the parking lot of Monroe & Wells Financial, the building seemed larger than ever, an intimidating glass fortress that reflected the sky like a mirror. She had walked through those glass doors hundreds of times before, always proud to stand beside her husband, the man everyone saw as the face of success. Now, every reflection she passed felt like an accusation. Inside, the lobby gleamed. Marble floors, gold accents, a massive logo on the wall that spelled NWF Holdings. The receptionist glanced up, then froze. Charlotte noticed the flicker of discomfort in her eyes before she could mask it with a polite smile. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, her tone hesitant. I wasn't expecting..." Charlotte's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to see Jonathan." "Mr. Monroe's in a meeting," the receptionist began, but then a pair of footsteps clicked across the marble floor. Deliberate, confident. Sienna Brooks emerged from the corridor, her heels sharp against the tile, her tailored black dress hugging her like armor. Her youth was blinding, her confidence rehearsed. She smiled, not with kindness, but with victory. "Well," Sienna said, her tone dripping with sweetness, "this is unexpected." Charlotte's stomach twisted, but she held her ground. "I want to speak to my husband." "Your ex-husband," Sienna corrected, crossing her arms. The diamond on her finger, Charlotte's diamond, flashed under the lobby light. "He's busy. You should really stop showing up uninvited. It's undignified." Charlotte's breath caught. "Undignified?" "Jonathan asked me to handle his personal affairs now," Sienna continued smoothly. "So, whatever this is, money, documents, closure, I suggest you go through me." Charlotte's eyes hardened. "You're handling his personal affairs? How convenient. Did he teach you how to forge signatures too, or was that your own contribution?" Sienna's smirk faltered. For a split second, something like fear flickered behind her confidence. But then she recovered. "You should go, Charlotte. You don't belong here anymore." The elevator behind her chimed, and Jonathan stepped out. Sleek, commanding, the picture of success. His arm slid around Sienna's waist like it belonged there. His face showed no trace of guilt, only annoyance. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked flatly. Charlotte turned to him, her voice trembling but clear. You drained our account. You left a text message, Jonathan. A text. He sighed as if she were a nuisance. You're making a scene. A scene? Her voice rose despite herself. You erased me. You took everything. His lips curled into a cruel smile. Correction. I took my money. You didn't earn it, Charlotte. You lived off me for years, pretending to be supportive while doing… What? Flipping pancakes and organizing fundraisers? Sienna stifled a laugh, leaning closer to him. Charlotte's eyes stung, but she didn't look away. I believed in you, she whispered. I stood by you when no one did. You were nothing when I met you, Jonathan. Nothing. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a cold hiss. And now I'm everything. That's what happens when you stop dragging dead weight. The words hit like a blade. Around them, employees stared from the corners of the lobby, pretending to work, whispering behind screens. The humiliation burned deep into her skin. Charlotte's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She ignored it. Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks and turned to Sienna. Security will escort her out. Sienna nodded, her expression smug. But Charlotte didn't move. Her gaze shifted past them, to the enormous MWF Holdings logo glinting behind the reception desk. Her father's initials, her father's legacy. Jonathan had once told her it was a coincidence, that Wells was the name of his first investor, but the memory now clawed back through her shock, a faint recollection of a conversation years ago when her father said, "One day this company will protect you, even if you don't know it yet." Charlotte took a slow breath. She didn't say a word. She simply looked at Jonathan, really looked, and saw not power, not control, but a man who had built his entire empire on someone else's foundation. Don't worry, she said softly. You'll see me again. He laughed. I doubt that. But something in her tone unsettled him, just enough that his smirk faltered for a second. She turned and walked out, her heels echoing across the marble, her back straight despite the weight crushing her chest. Outside, the wind bit cold against her face. She stopped by her car, her hands shaking as she finally checked her phone. Dozens of messages flooded her screen, some from friends, others from news alerts. One headline caught her breath. Jonathan Monroe rumored to propose to Secretary Sienna Brooks at Investors Gala next week. Charlotte stared at it, the words blurring. Around her, the city hummed, indifferent to her pain. She sank into the driver's seat, trembling, her tears falling silently. And yet beneath that grief, something steady began to take shape. The same calm fire that had once made her father call her his quiet strategist. She didn't know how yet, but Jonathan's empire, her father's company, would soon learn that the woman he discarded was not broken. She was waiting, and when the truth surfaced, the man who thought he owned everything would learn who truly did. Rain drizzled against the wide front windows of the small suburban cafe where Charlotte sat alone, stirring her untouched tea. Days had passed since that humiliating scene in Jonathan's office, but the echoes of his laughter still played in her head. The gossip had spread faster than she could breathe. Neighbors whispered when she walked past. Old friends avoided her calls, and even Jonathan's mother, who used to adore her, had coldly suggested she move on with dignity. Bills lay scattered across her kitchen table at home, and eviction notices waited in a neat stack by the door. Every day, another piece of the life she built was stripped away. She stared out the cafe window, her reflection pale and tired in the glass. She'd barely slept, barely eaten, and yet something inside her refused to break. There was a thin thread, invisible but unyielding, that still held her together. A gentle voice pulled her from her thoughts. Charlotte Monroe. She looked up, startled. The man before her looked almost the same as she remembered. Tall, calm, with kind eyes and that faint trace of a smile that never seemed forced. Adam West, her childhood friend. She blinked in disbelief. Adam? He nodded, setting his briefcase down before sitting opposite her. It's been a while. 15 years, she whispered. He studied her quietly for a moment. I heard about what happened, he said softly. I'm sorry, Charlotte. You didn't deserve that. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Apparently I did. The universe has an odd sense of balance. Adam's eyes softened. No, Jonathan does. The sound of his name tightened her chest. She looked down, tracing the rim of her teacup. How much did you hear? Enough, he said. Enough to know he drained the accounts, left you buried in debt, and spread lies to protect his image. He paused, lowering his voice. Charlotte, I've seen this before. Men like Jonathan, they think they're invincible, but they all make the same mistake. She glanced up. And what mistake is that? They always leave a trail. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain grew heavier, tapping against the glass like an impatient metronome. Adam reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim folder. I looked into Monroe and Wells Financial. I shouldn't have, but I did. I found something strange. Charlotte frowned. Strange how? Jonathan's company filings are a mess. Several offshore accounts under shell names, forged loan documents, and signatures that don't match his handwriting? He paused, watching her reaction. Some of those documents bear your name, Charlotte. He's been using your signature to authorize financial transactions. Her breath caught. What? Your name's on a remortgage of your house. He borrowed against it, twice. And there's evidence that he's been moving money under subsidiary accounts. The total missing funds, roughly 200 million. She stared at him, stunned into silence. The number felt surreal, as though he were talking about someone else's life. He said the account was his, she murmured, almost to herself. He said I didn't earn it. Adam leaned forward. You earned far more than you realize. Jonathan's empire sits on foundations you own. Charlotte, or rather, that your father left behind. Did you know he still listed Wells Holdings under his estate when he passed? She froze. Wells Holdings? That was one of my father's companies. Adam nodded slowly. It still is, technically. And guess who owns 100% of its shares? Her heart pounded. Adam, you, he said quietly. It was transferred into a trust under your maiden name. Jonathan's been working under your company all along. He just doesn't know it. Charlotte's mind spun, images flashing. Her father's office, his words years ago. I built this to protect you. Jonathan's arrogance, the logo on the wall, MWF, Monroe and Wells Financial. It wasn't his empire at all. Tears burned her eyes, but not from grief. It was something else. A rising, fierce clarity. Adam slid a flash drive across the table. I've copied everything I could find. Documents, transactions, forged contracts. It's all here. If you take this to the authorities, Jonathan's done. But you need to be careful. He's powerful, connected. He'll fight dirty. Charlotte picked up the flash drive, her fingers trembling as if it were a live wire. What if it's not enough? What if they don't believe me? They will, Adam said firmly, but you'll need witnesses, someone close to him who can confirm what he's been doing. She let out a weary laugh. You mean his mistress? She's not exactly on my side. Adam looked thoughtful. Maybe not now, but give her time. People like Jonathan use everyone, even the ones they think they love. The words lingered. That night, Charlotte sat alone in her dimly lit living room, the flash drive resting beside her like a loaded gun. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing the war inside her chest. She thought about her children asleep upstairs, their faces peaceful, unaware of how close they were to losing everything. She thought about Jonathan, probably dining somewhere fancy, whispering empty promises into Sienna's ear. She could almost see it, the charm, the lies, the same tactics he'd used on her once. Her phone buzzed, vibrating across the coffee table. A message from an unknown number. He's not who you think he is, Charlotte frowned. Who is this? She replied. After a pause, the next message came. Meet me tomorrow. I can prove it. There was no name, only an address. A small downtown cafe she recognized immediately. She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She had no idea that the message came from Sienna Brooks, the very woman who had replaced her, now realizing that Jonathan's lies extended even to her. Charlotte leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The pieces were shifting. Adam's words echoed in her mind. They always leave a trail. Jonathan thought he had buried her, but beneath the ashes, something was beginning to rise. and soon that trail would lead straight back to him. The ballroom glittered like a cathedral of wealth. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over a sea of tuxedos, sequins, and champagne. A grand banner hung above the stage. Monroe and Wells Financial Annual Investor Gala. Jonathan Monroe stood at the center of it all, polished and powerful, his arrogance gleaming brighter than the gold cufflinks on his wrists. Cameras flashed as he smiled for investors. His arm proudly draped around Sienna Brooks. To the crowd, they were the image of success, a visionary CEO and his radiant fiancée. Only a few feet away, in the shadowed corner of the ballroom, Charlotte Monroe stood among the press and guests, unnoticed in her sleek black gown. She was calm, poised, and invisible, just as she wanted to be. Adam stood beside her, his expression unreadable, the faintest nod exchanged between them. Across the room, Sienna's laughter rang hollow. Her hand trembled slightly around her champagne glass. She hadn't slept in days, haunted by Jonathan's voice, his insults, his threats, his last cruel promise. If you ever betray me, I'll ruin you like I ruined her. Now under the spotlight, she smiled for the cameras, concealing the flash drive tucked into the lining of her clutch. The same one Charlotte had given her yesterday, loaded with Jonathan's forged contracts, laundered transfers, and voice recordings, Sienna's own bitter insurance turned into a weapon for justice. Jonathan raised his glass, his smile blinding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice rich and commanding, "tonight we celebrate loyalty, perseverance, and the unmatched success of Monroe and Wells Financial. Together, we've built an empire that stands as a testament to trust." Charlotte's lips curved into a quiet, almost sad smile. Trust. The word echoed like poison. She glanced towards Sienna, who caught her gaze across the ballroom. For a heartbeat, time stilled. Both women, once enemies, now shared the same secret, the same quiet fury. Jonathan continued, oblivious. "To those who have stood by me, who believed in me." The ballroom doors burst open. A hush swept through the crowd as uniformed officers entered, their badges catching the chandelier's light. Gasps followed as they moved through the aisle, purposeful and silent, until they stopped in front of Jonathan. "Jonathan Monroe," one of them said firmly, "you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and forgery." The room erupted in chaos. Champagne flutes shattered. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Jonathan blinked, confused, then furious. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "This is a mistake. Do you have any idea who I am?" But the officer was already reading him his rights. Behind him, investors whispered, faces paling as they checked their phones. Emails, messages, notifications spreading like wildfire. News outlets had already picked up the story. The flash drive Adam had sent to the authorities earlier that evening had done its work faster than expected. Jonathan's eyes darted toward Sienna. "You," he hissed. "You did this." Sienna flinched but stood her ground. "You did this to yourself," she said quietly, her voice trembling but resolute. "You lied to everyone, even me." He turned, searching the crowd, and then he saw her, Charlotte. For a second, his mask cracked. His face drained of color as she stepped forward, calm and unflinching, the soft rustle of her gown cutting through the murmurs. Reporters' cameras swiveled, recognizing her instantly. "Charlotte," he rasped, disbelief warping his voice. How?" She stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady, her tone almost gentle. "I told you you'd see me again." "You set me up," he spat. "No," she said. "You did that all on your own. I just let the truth do what it does." An officer reached for Jonathan's wrist. He resisted, yanking free, shouting at the crowd. "You think she's innocent? She's nothing. She's nobody." Charlotte tilted her head slightly, her voice cutting through the noise. "Nobody." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single document, the original certificate of ownership for Wells Holdings. Her father's name on the header, her own signature beneath it. "You should have read the fine print of your empire, Jonathan. You never built it. You worked for me." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Even the officers paused. Jonathan's face contorted, his arrogance shattering as the truth struck. "That's impossible," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's real," Charlotte said softly. My father made sure I'd be protected, even from you." For a moment he stood frozen, caught between rage and disbelief, before the officers clasped the cuffs around his wrists. Cameras flashed like lightning. The mighty Jonathan Monroe dragged through the crowd he once ruled, screaming, "You'll regret this, Charlotte! You'll regret this!" But she didn't move. She just watched, her face unreadable, until the ballroom doors closed behind him. The silence that followed was thick and electric. Sienna exhaled shakily, her eyes meeting Charlotte's once more. For a brief moment, neither woman said a word. Then Sienna whispered, "Thank you for letting me help." Charlotte gave her a faint smile. "We both needed freedom. Now we have it." Adam approached, touching Charlotte's arm lightly. "It's over." She nodded, though her voice was quiet. "No, it's finally beginning." Weeks later, the courtroom overflowed with reporters, their cameras flashing as Jonathan Monroe was led in, gaunt and furious. The evidence was overwhelming. Sienna's recordings, Adam's documents, Charlotte's ownership papers. The prosecution's voice echoed as the gavel fell. "Guilty on all counts." Jonathan's protest was drowned beneath the roar of the press. Charlotte rose from her seat, her chin lifted, her expression calm. When he turned to her one last time, eyes wild, she met his gaze without flinching. "You thought you destroyed me," she said quietly, "but you only destroyed yourself." The judge's gavel struck again. Jonathan was escorted away, his pleas dissolving into silence. Outside, the air was bright and clear. Charlotte stepped into the sunlight, her children running to her side, their small hands wrapping around hers. Adam stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. "Mom," her daughter asked softly, "are we going to be okay now?" Charlotte smiled, her eyes glistening but steady. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice full of quiet certainty. "We're going to be just fine." The cameras flashed behind them, capturing her silhouette as she walked down the courthouse steps. Not as a victim, not as the wife left behind, but as the woman who reclaimed her power. The world that once mocked her now whispered her name in awe. The empire her husband thought he built was hers all along. And as she disappeared into the sunlight, Charlotte Monroe finally became what she was always meant to be, free, unbroken, and unforgettable.